Hi. I've not been to this event before, and I was expecting it to be a bit smaller. But my name is James King. I run two companies. The first is called Science Practice, and it's a bit of a niche sort of design consultancy. We work mainly with academic, scientific sort of researchers and research institutions, and we like to think we collaborate with them rather than having a sort of client service provider relationship. And we do all sorts of different projects, and I'll show one of them tonight. And then I run a more sort of commercial company as well called SPI, which is a joint venture between Science Practice and another user research organisation called Eclipse Experience. And that company really focuses on medical, and that's why I guess I'm here to talk to you today. SPI, I'll just give a really brief introduction. So we design, we research, and we build software as medical device. So we work in using sort of all the best user experience design, development, and user research practices that we know of from the world of UX, and we try to apply that into a medical context, which isn't always easy. I think, as Elise alluded to before, it's very difficult to do agile, but hopefully not impossible. And we focus really on serving pharmaceutical industry. We work with Department of Health in the UK as well, and we collaborate with smaller groups of clinicians, and we are setting up a few new joint ventures as well. The talk I'm going to give today is two projects. One is a citizen science project, and I'll talk a little bit about that, and then about working with academia, and the sort of, I think, the thing that makes that world different to traditional UX, which is research ethics. And then the second project I'll talk about is a sort of genomic medicine project, and then I'll talk a little bit about software as medical device and regulations, which are the thing that makes making medical devices different to making other sorts of digital products. So first, the citizen science sort of aspect. So this is a project called Dementia Citizens. It's not launched yet, although it's been published. It's what's called a citizen science platform. Just a really quick show of hands if anyone knows what citizen science is or means. Just a few. Okay, I'll just explain that. So citizen science is an idea whereby researchers in academic science or commercial science involve people outside of their field in the research process. So that could be something like asking volunteers to catalogue the types of sea urchins they find on the seashore near their homes, or counting the number of bird eggs in the nests around where they live. So you're sort of using a volunteer really as a research assistant. But also maybe in the more medical context it's interesting because clinical trials are actually a sort of form of citizen science. They've not really been thought about that in that way before, but they are, because you're involving people who aren't scientists in the research process, and they just happen to be the subject of the research. But I think what's nice about thinking about it from this collaborative aspect is that you start to see your research participants not as subject matter, but as actual people to kind of work with and collaborate with, which is nice. So that's the sort of the philosophy behind this project. The project's funded by Nesta, which is an innovation charity based in London. And the basic idea is to connect people with dementia and their carers to the dementia research community in new ways. And the platform will be some technology. It'll be a set of sort of web services and a framework for building applications. And each application you build will be a different research project. So I don't know if anyone's heard of Apple Research Kit platform, but it's a kind of similar idea to that, but really focused around dementia. And in fact, we might end up building on top of ResearchKit. So this is the sort of process or the life cycle of a research project on dementia citizens. So at the top you've got all the stuff that relates to the kind of the academic researchers. At the top all the stuff that relates to the patients, and at the bottom all the stuff that relates to the academic researchers. So the first thing that happens is the researcher comes up with a hypothesis that they want to test, and that hypothesis is very important, because when we were sort of working on the early stages of this project, and we were trying to think about the sorts of research projects that would run on the platform, we made quite an early decision early on that it would be research with a question that the participants would be interested in. So the opposite of that would be a research project whereby you're just gathering data from people, and then you don't really have a clear question, but you're hoping there'll be something interesting in the data at the end of it, and you'll learn something new. We want to sort of exclude those sorts of projects, and just have projects which had a really, really clear question that people could get engaged with and find the answer interesting, and therefore want to take part, because they're not going to be paid to be part of these projects. So the researcher creates the project, they publish it to the platform. The research project is an app that you download to your smart device, and the app really sort of helps you as a participant take part in the research project. And that app will also gather data, send that back to the researchers, and the researchers will publish their findings. And again, on the flip side, we wanted to make sure that the research findings were published in a sort of timely manner. So academic research tends to have a life cycle of about 2 to 3 years, but we really wanted interim preliminary findings to be published much faster, because you don't really want someone taking part in the project to have to wait 3 years to find out what the result was. So that's how it sort of works in theory. This is one of the launch projects, and it's a collaboration with Glasgow Caledonian University and a charity called Playlist for Life. And these two organisations work with professionally trained carers who go into care homes, and they bring with them an iPod generally, and they sit with a person with dementia, and they put the headphones on, and they'll play music, and they'll wait until the person with dementia recognises what they're listening to, and then they'll try and play more of that, basically. And if you have time and you're interested, Google Alive Inside, and there's a film trailer that follows the American charity that does very, very similar work over in the States and sort of inspired these people. And it's absolutely amazing, because you see people who are basically incapacitated by dementia and can't really respond, and are really living a very, very poor sort of existence. They suddenly become alive, and it triggers all sorts of areas of the brain that would otherwise have not been triggered. So in terms of therapy, music is being seen as incredibly powerful anecdotally. It's very difficult to gather research evidence that shows that this is better than a drug, because music doesn't tend to get put into clinical trials because it's too expensive to run a clinical trial. You can't, music companies don't really want to sell music for clinical consumption, so there's no real emphasis there, which means that interventions like this, which is as simple as playing some music to someone, are very difficult to find funding for, and very difficult to try and persuade the people that run the care system that it's a worthwhile thing to do. So this project is an attempt to gather the relevant research evidence to make this argument easier to win. So what will happen is the people taking part in the project will be able to download the research project to their device, and it'll basically make the protocol, which a carer would have to be trained to do, much easier for them to do. So we're aiming at informal carers, so people that might have a loved one with dementia, or maybe people who are professional carers but are interested in taking part. There's no reason to exclude them. And they'll basically take their phone in, they'll sit down, the app will guide them through the process, how to find the right music, and that sort of thing. And then they'll sit together and they'll construct a playlist together. And that session where they're constructing a playlist is meant to be therapeutic. So what happens once you've done this, so basically helps you find the right music by looking at age and demographics and where the person grew up, for instance, and maybe what genres of music they were interested in. And then as when you get a hit, when you add something to the playlist, it asks you why, not just for the researchers to find that interesting, but also maybe to spark conversation between the carer and the person with dementia. And then at the end of the session, there's a small number of questions to answer as a pair, as the carer and the person with dementia. And these questions then generate the research data that the researchers will use to write up their academic paper. So The app, on one hand, is an intervention. It's meant to make people happier and healthier and improve their quality of life through music. On the other hand, it's meant to gather the data necessary to prove that that is a worthwhile thing, and kind of make the argument more strongly in the sort of medical sphere. Every 6 weeks, there's a quality of life questionnaire. So it's not just this momentary data we're interested in. We're also interested in long-term effects of this over time. So how it improves your quality of life. And this questionnaire, it looks really, really simple, but it's a validated questionnaire, which means that if people answer these questions in a certain way, there's enough data to back it up that says, yes, their quality of life is at a certain level. So although it looks incredibly simple, it is actually very, very simple, but just someone's gone to the effort and the work of talking to enough people, running this question enough times, and validating it against other more clinically accurate but more difficult to implement measures of quality of life to prove that it's valid. But what makes this sort of work different as a sort of user experience research, designer and research sort of team is that medical ethics sort of affect everything that we do and the way we approach it. And one of the most important things about medical ethics is achieving informed consent. So effectively, by downloading this app and taking part and contributing your data, you're taking part in a human research study. And ethics quite rightly govern that process. So what we need to be very careful of is that when the app gets downloaded, people understand what they're doing and the data they're being given. But one of the ways that we're trying to make sure that that we do this right is by engaging with ethicists very, very early on. So the project now has its own ethics board, and because it's a sort of new style of medical research, rather than just going to an independent ethics board, which wouldn't have seen really a project like this before, we're working with a team of ethicists right from the beginning who will then sort of guide the process, and then at the end, hopefully give it a tick in the ethical box. And this is just maybe one of the very interesting things that happened during this project, which is Apple released this ResearchKit platform, which, if anyone's interested in doing mobile medical research, is an incredible sort of ground bed to build off on, and we may end up using it for this project. Really quickly, so I've only got 4 minutes left, I'll just talk about the next project, which is completely different. It's around the relationship between people's genes and how they affect them. So their phenotype, so how tall they are, what colour their eyes are, what diseases they have, that sort of thing. And the project is aimed at creating a new research tool for people who are trying to understand the connection between genes and their effects on people. Allow them to discover interesting facts about that data which they would otherwise not be able to see. So I don't have very long, but this is the end result, which is a new visualization method for what are called multiple sequence alignments, which is where you have lots of examples of the same gene from lots of different organisms, and you're looking for similarities that might indicate that this part of the gene is more important. It's a very, very simple visualization technique, whereby if you imagine you've got your strings of amino acids and genes, it basically looks for all of the common threads at each position and then bundles together those strings to make this meaningful visualization. And we built a software tool, and we worked with a lab at the European Bioinformatics Institute to build that. We've just published a research paper in Nucleic Acids Research, which is apparently a big thing. We've developed a web app, so people don't have to download anything. They can just try it out by uploading their data and visualizing it very, very quickly. But the reason why I show this is not necessarily because it's medical, because this is not a medical device. This is a research tool. So the people that will be using this won't be basing any clinical decision on this data, the way it's visualized. They will be using it to check a hypothesis or to learn something new about the genetic data they're looking at. But what's interesting is that the same tools and technologies which are coming out of that particular research community of bioinformatics are starting to make their way into the clinic. And there's lots of interesting cases where you can use very, very similar tools to do interesting things, such as pharmacogenomics, which is where you get your genome sequence to check if you will respond well or badly to a particular drug. Cancer, obviously, you can get your genome sequence, your cancer sequence, to see where the mutation has occurred, and to see what effect that mutation might have and what drugs might help kill that tumor. Inherited disorders, so you can see whether you've got a child with a particular condition, where it came from, and what combination of genes led to it. And lastly, a sort of risk assessment. So if you're thinking of having children, will they inherit the disease that you have? And really, really quickly, in order to do what we were doing before, but in a clinical context, we have to think about this software as a medical device, which leads to a whole different realm of pain, really, for a user experience company, because you have to follow regulations like this, ISO 13485 and IEC 62304, which are basically mandated rules that you need to follow in order to prove that you've developed something in the right way. And one of the things that we're trying to do, this isn't our slide, but take this sort of process, which basically means that you can't do Agile, but do all the things that are important in an Agile way. So, as Elise said, it's very, very difficult to do Agile in a medical context. I think it's an imperative to do it because you can't develop good products without getting good feedback on it and iterating and moving quickly. And therefore, what we're trying to do is that. And we've got our audit for 13485 where someone comes and tells us if we've done it right in February. So wish us luck. Thank you very much. Do you have questions or no time?
No questions.
Sure? Okay, cool. Does anyone have any questions?
With gene sequencing, the tool you showed, how much will machine learning come into that to try and understand exactly what the varying patterns that do certain things?
I don't know. Machine learning is super interesting with this because the amount of data that you have to look at, you can't really expect. We designed a visualization tool, but we can't really expect a researcher to look through all however many billion bases of DNA we have and look for a particular anomaly. So things like machine vision, machine learning are really, really interesting in this area. It's just we're not that adept at machine learning to start applying it in our projects yet. But yeah, I think it'll make a big impact on the way that we look at these sorts of big data sets. Yeah. Does anyone else? Hi.
How does this differ to products such as 23andMe that kind of also provide a lot of the genome and patterns and inheritance?
So the 23andMe is software as a medical device. So I don't know if you heard, they got in trouble because with the FDA, which is the American regulator, because they were giving lots of information away to end users or patients that they didn't have necessarily enough evidence to back up. They since kind of solved some of those issues, and they're starting to give medical information again. So the project I showed you is more like a research tool, so it's very different to 23andMe. But the idea that you're starting to see this data come into clinical decision making is actually very similar to 23andMe. And we've all done it at the office, and it's amazing what it tells you, the information that you get back. The tricky thing comes when someone has a mutation that doesn't necessarily already have a 23andMe test assigned to it. So that could be a novel mutation that hasn't emerged yet and it's just specific to you, and then trying to infer what that mutation has done or whether that does mean that this is a disease-causing mutation or not. That's when it gets new and novel, and that's where you need clinical geneticists to look at it and make inferences and to try and diagnose you. And that's not something at the moment that can be automated in a sort of 23andMe style way. But it is brilliant. It is really interesting.
It's the next step in regards to you use the tools such as 23andMe for, excuse the phrase, for everyday soft users that just have a airy-fairy light interest in it. And then to extend that product or to integrate into that product and allow geneticists to use the data and some of the other underlying data for, like you said, tests that we don't yet have any tests for, to just look at that data and have more DNA, more supply as such.
So 23andMe we think it's great as consumers, but I think the medical community doesn't necessarily want to look at that data yet, unfortunately. That's primarily because there's a sort of wall of what is a medical device and what isn't built around, and everyone has a different opinion of that. And generally 23andMe is a consumer product and not necessarily something that your doctor is going to want to look at your, Sorry?
What actually is 23andMe?
Oh, sorry. It's costs about £125. You can buy the kit in Boots or Superdrug, and you create a lot of saliva. You put it in a test tube. You mail it to California, and 23andMe will do a lot of standard tests. It's not clear to me whether they do whole genome sequencing or they just look for certain parts of your genome. But basically, they tell you a lot of interesting information about your where you come from, and your potential risk of certain diseases. So, for instance, there's a very clear correlation between a gene called BRCA and breast cancer. So if you have a mutation in BRCA, then you might want to consider taking some sort of corrective action before potentially being affected by the disease. So that's when it is giving information that is used in a clinical decision, and that's why doctors don't necessarily want to look at it, because they don't necessarily trust that that data is true and real, and they're very, very careful about who and what they trust. So that's where there's this sort of divide between clinicians and what's maybe available to patients.
Thank you.